This is Andy Tube, and I'm at the point now I'm going to start restacking the carbons into the ceramic holder for them. But I wanted to make some observations about the carbon discs. They're a little bit thinner than the others I have done. They're very strong. They seem like they're possibly more dense. I didn't break any cleaning them, and I had to push pretty hard, as you saw on the paper towel method, which is why I went to 600 grit sandpaper, which cleaned them really easy just by gently rubbing them. But they seem thin, so I found a broken piece from a button style controller that I did on a 404 slant needle, and I just put my little gauge on here, and it's so minute. I don't have a digital one, but it's not even to the #1 first mark. It's just off the zero, so to speak. But when I pull that slant-o-matic one out and I stick in one from this type or style A, it won't, it just falls right through the slot. So I know that they're smaller. I can't give you a millimeter amount or anything like that. I don't have a digital one, but if I adjust this to gently hold the carbon disc in this foot controller I'm working on, then I try and slide a disc from that slant 404 machine, it won't go in. It just won't fit without opening it. So I wanted to make that observation. And you may have noticed when I was polishing these, there was one at first that wouldn't polish, and it had this little, it was very dark on both sides, and it had this little circle mark in the center. And I finally realized it's not carbon, it's metal. And that little dot was from being the first thing put in here, and I believe, resting up against the rivet on the contact inside. And because that matched up perfectly with that. And I've never seen this before. Usually the first one that goes in has been like a double thickness. So that was unique, and I think this is aluminum because it won't, oops, let me get that little piece out of there. It won't stick to my magnetized disc, and it feels pretty lightweight. So I think it's just like a punched out piece of aluminum, and that's what I'm going to be putting in first when I do this. On both sides here, there was two of them. And the other reason I'm pretty sure these are all thinner is that I usually have a number in the 50s disc on each side, and this one had 67. So for you mathematicians, if you want to figure out the the percentage that they're thicker, usually it seems like let's say 55 on average, 55 or 56, and now this one had 67. So that they're definitely thinner, but I don't know of any better way, so I'm still just going to drop in a few at a time and make sure that they use my little barbecue stick to make sure that they've seated flat as far as I can tell. So if you saw me cleaning them, almost every one had some burnt carbon debris on them. almost every one. So I ended up just using cleaning every one. And once I went to that 600 grit wet dry sandpaper, which I use dry, but man, did that go quick. And I think I'm going to use that sandpaper from now on, because you don't have to put much pressure, and you can just whoops, you can just glide the you know your finger on top of it and just glide it along that sandpaper back and forth, like usually 3 or 4 times. The worst ones were 6 or 7 times. You have to be gentle because it'd be easy to take off too much. My next size grit up from the 600 was 1000, and it did not work as well as the 600. It barely worked better than just using a paper towel. So I just wanted to mention all those things, and if you saw me take this apart, you see it's pretty much the same thing as the much later versions. So I'll just continue this tedious process. this for you. This three-prong cord, which has both the power lead from the electrical outlet on the wall and the wire lead from the foot controller or the foot pedal, both go into this two-piece plug assembly. Okay, and the piece that has the round hole for both the wires to come into, I'm going to call the base of these two pieces, or the base of the plug, and this thinner piece I'm going to call the top or the cap of the plug. Okay, and you can see this wire kind of tied in a knot here. I think that's to keep it from pulling out of the plug. And then you have these little two-piece connectors here that this faces out. Okay, this will face out, so when you plug it on the machine, the post on the machine is going in these holes. Okay, and first let me show you this top or the cap piece if I can. I'm not sure that the light will get in here, but let's try it. You may be able to faintly, let's see, let me put this under here for a little, and then there's my pointer here. So you may be able to faintly see the number 1, 2, 3 in these three slots. Let's see if I can take a photo of this and give you a slide here. I don't know if it'll be any better, but let's try. Okay, then you see there's this open area here for the wire bundle to go in, and then there's in these three slots there's depressed areas for the wire to lay in. Okay, and on the base of it, there's really not any numbers like 1, 2, 3 down here to match up with that, but it has the same area, has this big or open area for the wire bundle to fit in when you close it, and it has deeper slots, deeper areas in there for the wires to lay in there. And it's kind of a pain to get this all assembled, but we'll be doing it with some new wires. But let's see if I can, well, let me cut these old wires off here, and pull that out, and we can take a little bit better look. Let me see if I can get a closer picture of this for you. Okay, so let's take a look at these now. See if if I need a tool or if I can just untwist them. Ooh, they're tight. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to grab a little wrench and some pliers here or something. That's good. I guess you don't want this vibrating loose over time, right? Whee, those are tight. Okay, be right back. I was looking for my little tiny adjustable wrench. I couldn't find it. So I just used I used 2 pair of pliers to loosen this. Once it's loosened, this knurled knob on the end just unscrews from the threads here. And on the inside of it, it's scooped out or dished out to have room for the wire. And that scooped out part faces the wire, and the back side of it is just flat. Okay? And then here's the part of it that goes onto the prong of the machine terminal, and it's threaded here. So it's just like a tube that's threaded with a nut, and the threads are for you to put this knurled like nut back on there with the curved side facing it, and tighten up and put the wire in there. And the wire is just you know, it's stranded wire, and it's twisted together and then wrapped around that screw right there, like that. Okay, and then you have 4 wires, 2 from each cord, but you only have 3 prongs, you know, 3 nuts and screw here, so you have to double up on one of them. I wanted to show you these parts up a little bit closer when I was taking them apart. I'm preparing my wires. You know, I could have just bought a new cord that had the new type of vinyl molded plug on it, but this was the original plastic, you know, 3-prong plug, so I wanted to reuse it, so I'm rewiring it. I wanted flat wire. The old was flat. I couldn't find any smooth flat wire. You know, all the cords are these twin leads kind of molded together with this valley between them. So I decided to buy this fabric covered cord, and I just bought an 8-foot extension cord like this from the Home Depot, and it was $5, which was less expensive than buying cloth covered wire by the foot. And then I pushed it back. You know, it kind of collapses on itself to do the wire work, and then I'm gonna have to kind of like pull it up into the plug when I get ready to finish. But let me show you what I had to do here. This wire will be from the foot controller, and I split the molded wire down 1.5 inches on each side. I just separated them, and then I stripped off the insulation on each lead about 3/4 of an inch. 3/4 of 1 inch. Okay, and then this other wire, of course, is going to come from the wall outlet. It's going to be my power lead, and I did the same thing. I separated the 2 leads about 1.5 inches, and on one of the leads I stripped them 3/4 of an inch, like on the foot controller, but the other one I stripped back a little bit more. I'd say it's less than 1 inch, so maybe 7/8 of an inch. And that's because I have 4 wires, but I only have 3 of these terminations. Okay, and so I'm gonna have to put 2 wires on one of these. And if I just twist the two copper wires together, they're not going to fit under the little knurled knob. Even though one side is dished out to fit the wire, two are not going to fit. So I'm going to end up wrapping one of these from the foot controller around this power lead a couple of times and soldering it and cutting off the excess, so that then I just have one lead twisted together going up around the connector. So that's what that's all about. Now I slid these through here. These were tight fit with the with the cloth cover on there, but I got it. And let's see, I think I'm going to put the little knurled connector and stuff together here on first on one of the leads from the foot controller. Now I mentioned before there's this little notched out area scooped out here that is for the wire to lay in. Okay, so you want to just lay the vinyl on the tube with the copper wire lined up in that little opening, that notch, and let's see if I can do this and get it on film. And then I'm going to wrap my copper wires around, kind of like around the threads actually. See, I got to keep that copper wire into the groove and wrap it around behind the nut. Like so. Try and keep it tight and neat without a bunch of loose ends. I see they're already coming a little unraveled. Okay, then I got to try and get one of these nuts on the threads there to tighten that down. So that's why you wrap that clockwise, because you're going to be putting on the nut clockwise also. Got to get that copper wire a little bit below the first thread so I can get this nut on here and get it started. Yeah. It's going to be one of those little fiddly things to do, huh? I know that some of you really have a touch for this finer work, and you'd already be finished. I think I got a strand of the copper is caught on my first thread back here. So let's try this again. Come from the backside with the vinyl on the tube. Lay that copper wire right into the little scoop out or dip in there, and wrap the wire around behind the nut. Same kind of thing. It wants to catch on these threads back here. Maybe that's a little better. Let's try this now. You can't strip these brass nut and thread here. You know, it's not going to help you to do that. You want to get it on there nice and even, which I think I have. I'm going to tighten it as tight as I can by hand. Alright, and then let's see, I found a old 10 millimeter combination wrench here that I think will hold that nut while I give it a partial turn. It will hold the back part while I turn that nut. Can I do it maybe like this is better? While I turn that nut with some pliers, because they were definitely tightened down that hard when I went to take them off. And I looked again for my little adjustable. If you have a little small, like 4 or 6 inch adjustable wrench, it'd probably be easier to hold than this this setup that I got. Okay. Now, if you have ends sticking way out here, you can trim them off, but you want to be sure that you've got as much as possible of that copper into the space between the two nuts there. Okay. Now let's do the one on the power lead from the wall. We're going to have to try and do the same thing here. We'll lay this in kind of like the little groove, and we'll wrap the copper around it. Try and get it nice and tight on there. Let's see if I left any of the threads there showing so I can get this. Okay, my dish side towards the wire so that there's a little bit of space in there for the wire. I'm wondering, maybe I shouldn't have twisted these wires so tight, because it made them kind of round, and the little copper strands are sticking up as high as the threads for the nut. So I'm having trouble starting the nut. Maybe this one I'll squeeze flat with the plier or something. Okay, that actually is looking pretty good. If you can see that on your screen. And I'll hold on to that nut back there. Try and keep it from turning. You see how a crescent wrench that would be a perfect adjustable wrench, you know, would be perfect fit on this. But 3/8 was too small. That's 6/16. 7/16 was way too big. So I dug out my old millimeter set and That's about the best thing I could rig up right now. But you definitely want to get these good and snug, because they were very snug when I took them off. And you know, this is going to plug right on the end of your machine someplace, right? And you know, it's going to vibrate like crazy, so you don't want these wiggling loose and getting a loose connection or any arcing or sparking or anything in there. Okay, so far so good here. Right. I got a little piece sticking out there. Now, this is the one where I said I can't get two of these. You can see how hard of a time I'm having getting one wire under that nut. So this was the one I stripped back a little more. This is the other lead from my foot controller, and I'm going to put it right on the bottom there, line up the two vinyls, and I'm just going to wrap this real tight like that, just kind of like once around there, real good, like that. I think that'll be enough. I guess you could go a little bit more. The thing is, you got to solder this enough that it sticks together, right? But you don't want some big old glob of stuff here, or you're not going to be able to get your top part on and get everything closed, right? So that's why I said one good turn around the base of that there should do it, I'm thinking. So let me set up my little soldering pencil here, and we'll solder that up. Let's take a look. We'll check my soldering skills here. Look pretty good. I got a little bit up on this, so I'm going to have to probably bend that with pliers when the time comes. But the wires are fastened well together. So I just want to trim off the tail of that wire that's coming from the foot controller. I don't want that sticking out there. Okay. Let's see if I can get this last one on here then. It's definitely a little trickier because you got the two things going on, the two wires. Where's my little cutout notch? Boy, these are fiddly, aren't they? Yeah, that's what I thought. I got some solder up here on this lead, so I can't bend it by hand. Let's see if I can bend it a little with the plier and get it started around the corner at least. So you see, in watching this, you're probably convinced to just go buy a new cord and plug, right? Unless you do want to try and keep your project original, you know. Yeah, boy, that's... Let's see if I can get it around this way. Yeah, so come back in a couple of days and see if I've made any progress, okay? Okay, this is where I'm at with this 3-prong plug and the cord. Let me open it back up here if I can. It took me quite a while to get it to this point, and I've got some things to share with you about it, and choices I made that caused me a lot of difficulty in completing this, and they were mostly my own fault. And I'll explain. My idea of using this fancy cloth covered wire, they barely fit through the round hole in the plug. So the round hole in a plug like this is made for 2 wires. When you have a setup like this, where you have one going to the foot controller and the other is going to the electrical outlet. Now they make a plug like this that just had a smaller oval hole that you put one cord into, and that was for power only. So that made this a little more difficult. The next thing that I encountered was that this insulation on the wire was thicker than the old wire. It's thicker and it's a lot more stiffer. And on top of that, the wire itself appears to be 16 gauge, which really isn't needed for this. And that made it more difficult to get under the knurled nut here and putting it together. Not only more difficult to put it together, but to get them together enough to fit in the specialized slots of this molded plastic plug. Another thing I think I did wrong was I over twisted the strands together, thinking it would make them more compact, but it made them more round, which also made it more difficult to get under the nut. So I think I would still twist them, but I wouldn't do it so tightly. I think I would twist them a lot less. Now, when I wrapped the one wire around the other to solder it, the fact that they were both kind of over twisted and rounder made for a bigger, like a ball of wire here. So again, I don't think I twist them as much, and before I soldered, I think I'd flattened them just a little bit. Now, if you saw me do the soldering, I mentioned and I tried not to put too much solder on here and end up with a big solder blob. And I should have stopped soldering earlier than I did, because I did end up with a pretty good size glob of solder. And to make things worse, by using too much solder, some of that solder wicked up into the stranded wires. So when it was time to wrap it around this tube to put the nut on, it was too stiff, and I really had to work a lot with the pliers and bending it to get it flexible enough to go under the nut. So there's some things I should have, I could have done without the cloth covered cords. If I was doing it over again, I think I would just get black wire like this, and I would get to conductor, but 18 gauge instead of 16. And 18 gauge is plenty. Now that people think of that as lamp wire. It's called 2-18 SPT. An 18 gauge wire less than 50 feet long can accommodate up to 7 amps of power on a 120 volt system. And almost all Singer motors are less than 1 amp. So even an 18 gauge stranded wire would have 7 times the capacity needed for the sewing machine, motor, and light. Plus, it would have a lot smaller diameter, and I think it would fit under these nuts much better. And the insulation would be a little bit thinner, which would make it easier to accommodate in the space here and easier to bend and manipulate around. And after all this work, I still could not get the cap on completely, no matter what I tried. So let me grab it here. I ended up digging out my Dremel, and I put the little metal tip on here, the engraving cutting tip, and I had to run that, and I had to grind out the little tunnels for the tube part of this connector, and I also had to enlarge the space for the nut that's part of the tube to make all that bigger so that I could accommodate this, because I just couldn't tighten these things together enough to make them thin enough to fit in the original spaces. Okay, so I wanted to mention that. Now, when you put these into the slots, that if you remember the little notch out for the wire, it goes down on the bottom. And if you look at the back side of the nut here, you can see that should make a point come up to the top. You don't want a flat piece to be facing up. You need a point like that to be facing upwards. And that's so that it will go in this without modifying. So if you use the 18 gauge wire, you're not going to have any of these problems at all. And let me get this back down in here and get it turned so the point is up, and see if I can get this back together. I really didn't want to take it apart after as long as it took me to do it. But the other thing is, you'll notice that when you put the nut down into the space, the hole in the tube just barely shows over the hole in the plastic cover. That's how far down it has to go. And again, I had to make these bigger and wider to accommodate all of this stuff. Phew. So my little fun project I was so excited about this wire turned into a real pita. And if you're not familiar with that pita, how we use it here in the States, that means a pain in the beep. So I think you'll get the idea now. So you can avoid all of that with the tips that I gave you. My teachable moment here. Okay, so once you once you put this top cover on, you want to, of course, look all the way around and make sure that it's all flat and even, so that you know it's seated properly. Okay, and on this bottom side where the wire goes in is where that little tiny nut goes in, and it's cut to the same shape, I think 6-sided, so it will fit in there without turning. Then just hold your finger against it so you don't push it out when you put in the long little screw or bolt, and push it in as far as you can by hand, and then you're going to tighten it up with the screwdriver. And again, because of the shape of the hole, it won't turn. And you want to snug it up, but just remember, this is plastic, right? So you don't want to over tighten it and crack it. And it's not only plastic, it's pretty old plastic, so be careful. I'll put the other little nut in here on the bottom, and then just hold it like I did the other and enter in the little screw, and I'll snug this side up. So in the end, this turned out okay, but I really created a lot of extra work for myself. So I won't be doing that mistake again. So this is going to be a real unique 3-prong plug for me. So here's the final results. I've got my, what I think of as pretty cool cloth covered flat flexible cords going into the 3-prong plug, and it's all tightened up and sealed, secure, and everything like that. So the only thing that will be left, because I believe I mentioned that I bought this 8-foot extension cord just at the Home Depot, and it has this cool flat type of wall plug on one end, and on the other it had this 3 outlet that I just cut off the extra. And I made the cords, each cord about 10 inches longer than the original, mostly because I had the I had the wire to do it, and sometimes it just seems like the cord to the wall isn't quite long enough, so I figured, okay, I'll add a little bit, 10 or 12 inches to each cord. So all that's left for me, if I can find the end of the cord that's going to go into the foot controller, that's going to be this end, is going to be, when I get the foot controller all painted and reassembled, I've got to attach the new wire in through the grommet and in under the carbon stack, and put some I have these little spade clips to crimp on the end and go on the screws to attach it to the carbon stack container. So I'm going to wait to do that until I have that ready. But it shouldn't be as difficult to do, I hope. Okay, so there's the video of cleaning and restacking the carbon discs and replacing the old defective, worn out cords on this